This is a great opportunity also for me to bring together a group of artists, some newer artist connections and longer term artist connections from all over really, which is quite representative of my artistic lifestyle these days. You know, and artists I feel a connection with their practice. Really, we've had years of mind-opening conversations and just I feel like the dialogue has been really rich and significant to my own thinking and my own practice as well. So thank you all for being here today. You're all inspirational to me. And the idea, you know, for this exhibition came about in a few different directions, but you know, I like creating like a context for my own work and for the work that I see, thinking about past and present. And in ancient worlds, the 36 parallel played an important role in navigation, which is a key word I use in my own art practice. And it was used as a reference point for measuring distances and determining directions. So ancient map makers and navigators used the 36 parallel north as one of the reference points to create their maps and charts. And, you know, place is got a lot of tactile as well as intangible sort of layers to it, and it's something that I've been exploring in my work, and I think that the artists here have been doing as well. The 36 parallel has also been a place where there's been an exchange of goods and ideas and technologies across various cultures, and really in that regard have contributed to the development of ancient civilizations, and the work here is a reflection of how those crossovers are creating a platform for the work today. So as the 36 parallel serves as a geographical reference point, it's also key for me to think about how the understanding of the historical, cultural, and political events in various parts of the world are informing the work you're seeing here today. So it really serves as the conceptual backbone to this exhibit. And the 7, including myself, interdisciplinary artists that have been brought forth into this exhibit really expand this context, the notion of the 36 parallel, into the current context in unique ways. So before I introduce each of you, each of the participating artists, I did just want to acknowledge that one of the 7 is not with us in attendance today, Manoush Zamorandinia, who's an artist I went to art school with and who's giving a lecture right now. So she had a great excuse, but I did want to make a note about her work in part of the conversation. So Manoush Zamorandinia is an Iranian-born interdisciplinary artist. She makes visible emotional and psychological reflections in her mind's eye, inspired by nature and the environment. Zamorandinia employs walking as a catalyst to reference the power of technology and as a colonial structure while negotiating land boundaries. Her strolling or walking reimagines relationships between land and technology, addressing transformations of memory into physical space. And right after Liz Miller-Kovacs's wonderful pieces at the entrance, you'll see Manoush's 7 works there which resemble iPhones or mapping systems. So please do take a look and come back to meet her on September 9th. No further ado, I wanted to start by introducing each artist just quickly by name, and I would love all of you to just spend a couple of minutes introducing yourselves and your practice before we jump into focusing on the works of the show. So there's Liz Miller-Kovacs, you traveled all the way from Berlin, and Uma Rani Ili from San Francisco and LA, and Katie Merkin from San Francisco and Oakland, and Alex H. Nichols from San Francisco, and Ellen Driscoll from Brooklyn. So thank you all for being here. And do you want to start us off with
I can. I actually prepared something to read.
Okay.
Because this show to me is very smart, and it has a lot of layers in it. And I thought if I just throw out remarks off the cuff, I might miss some things. So I first just want to thank Beth for inviting me, and sharing this exhibition with these artists is a great honor for me. And to thank Sean for the elbow grease of being the maestro here. Thank you, Sean. So to me, the 36th parallel, which I hadn't really thought about until you brought it to my attention, is a circle and a line connecting points across vast spaces, geographic, but also metaphoric. And as Beth writes, historic, personal, and economic compasses orient us, and themes of earth, air, and water, sanctuary and its inverse, and the impact of our current Anthropocene moment on all that came before this moment. And I thought I would take this time to talk about the works which are right here. Family blanket, which is here, is an intimate object. It's a blanket passed down by my grandmother through my family to me with a lot of mending, and I added a lot of mends. I etched a diagram of the currents of wind as they move over the Atlantic Ocean onto the surface of the blanket as a physical mark of the 19th century journey made across that ocean by my ancestors from Ireland, who were fleeing the failure of the potato crop. It was a monoculture, desperate monoculture. The potato developed a blight. The crop failed, and 1 million people died, and 1 million people emigrated. So compressed onto the surface of this blanket is a stilled diagram of moving air over a vast space. And that space does go south to the 36th parallel, but this particular story is a northern one until you get to Boston in North America. That phenomenon, that historical event in Ireland was known as the Great Hunger. And at the bottom are contours of maps cut out of the bottom of the blanket. And if you were lying under the blanket, that's where your feet would be. So the kind of negative space of the map is where your restless feet are moving as you, in my case, struggle for sleep. The two woven self-portraits are from an ongoing series that express acute awareness of the interconnectedness of each individual, in this case, especially myself, with the larger impacts of global warming. I paint myself looking in a mirror, and then I cut my portrait into horizontal lines, back to the line of the 36th parallel, line and circle. I cut my portrait into horizontal lines to act as weft, woven into the cut warp of an image of a melting glacier, an oil refinery, floods, dead trees, and more. The structural matrix of the woven paper connotes the inextricable connection of each individual to the larger fate of our warming planet. So this is a very intimate act of cutting and then remaking essentially a structure, and a strong one, out of my small face, and in this case, the Whitegate oil refinery in Ireland, or this is a melting glacier in Antarctica that was photographed by a friend of mine who's offered me a stash of glacier photos for this work. But anyway, thank you.
There are really so many phrases that have come out of the written statements and expressions of all your work. And I think you all could jump in and get into in your works as Ellen did, but really some that stuck out to me were phrases such as containment and forced performance entailed in both domestic and agricultural economies. Spaces are excavated, depleted, and polluted by industry. Parallels between now and how culture exploits nature and the objecthood of the feminine. The relationship between capitalism's impact on the earth and the body, devastating effects on colonialism. So that's just half of them, and just like half of my little written list, but you can see there's so much richness. So you guys are welcome to dive in if you want to jump in, because I feel like, everything that you've shared in your poetic words are great leading points for different explorations of, the intimate and space and landscape. So.
Yeah. So would you like me to kind of respond to that, or talk about the work?
Jump into your work and
then
how
try and
that's kind of
yes. Okay. So again, also thank you so much for including me in this. I'll just briefly describe the three works that are here and how they're related to. So for me, all of my works are really, really focused on identity, and I see myself and my body as that place. So if we're talking about geography or location, there's the one location we all begin with, which is the body that we're given to start our lives and navigate our entire lives through. And for me, what I've been really exploring on a deep level is who am I? So I wake up every day and I'm like, who am I and what is my purpose? And so the first thing you see in the three pieces, so I have the video monologue that's in the old NEC TV, I have the pink box, and then I have a painting. The video is titled "While I Was Waiting for Permission to Be Me," and I really felt like I was waiting for permission to be me. And I don't know if this was because I'm a female, because I'm a mother, because I'm a wife, but all of these roles that were suddenly on me, writer, artist, wife, mother, I was like, oh, I'm waiting for permission to be me. And then I suddenly realized, like, while I was waiting, I had babies, I had exhibitions, I was doing my life. So this concept of waiting for someone to give me permission to be like, hey, you can be you now, was like, I realized it was completely preposterous and abstract, but it was literally how I was physically experiencing myself. Like there was somehow something that was occurring there. And then the painting is again an examination. It's a self-portrait, but it's me drawing myself and then cutting myself apart and then me putting myself back together. So there's this way in which each of my bodies of work are like a dissection of who I am and then a reintegration of who I am, as if I could control the definition of myself. And the pink box is one of the newest pieces, and I was going through an enormous amount of literal change in my life where I was ending every role that I had existed in. And I wanted to try and start from a place of like zero. Like what is it if you remove all your pillars, what is your identity? And the pink box always references a box, which is all the boxes that we exist in society, whether those are our roles, whether those are our cultures. And each person in this room has a history and a culture that both encloses them and also protects them. So I was looking really deeply at what is this box, and I had painted it pink because color itself also has rigid ideas of femininity, and how can color take on an element of something that's also controlled. So when we're trying to re-narrate our lives, what are we taking apart, and how can we sort of reclaim everything about ourselves? And so the performance is me inside the box, kind of trying to rebirth myself. And that goes back towards the liminal space that you were talking about, which is that place where we are one thing and we have to get to the other thing, but we're lost in the in-between. And I, for 2 years, was lost in the in-between. And so the performance, which will be done on the 9th here, but will also be done in Drancy, hung from a redwood tree, is my attempt to move myself from what I was to what I am, what I will become. And so I'm performing inside the box and moving inside the box, recognizing that I'm shifting that. So that's the 3 pieces that are here.
And I'm just hearing so much resonance already, like with what Ellen said about the weft and the warp, also talking about monoculture, and my work has to do with agriculture. And then Alex talking about this amazing moment of transition as a mother and an artist. And that really relates to my work as well. So I also work from a point of identity as a mother and a woman, and that's very important. My work kind of centers on the act of giving care, and that's become very important since I became a mother. But I'm also very interested in how we can care for materials and for the earth. And so I'm interested in taking the act of giving care from something seen as subservient and a kind of a form of weakness, and using my process to transform that into a place of power. And I do that through different material studies. My work almost always starts with a found material, and it's not something random, it's something that usually comes to me and I feel a really strong sense of resonance with. And so over time, those materials have ranged from things like telephone books. I did a big project after my children were born with discarded plastic shopping bags. And the work you see here is about 5 years in the making. And like Alex was talking about, it's kind of like followed me through a big transformation in my life. And the source material for this is grocery ads. So the grocery flyers that come in the mail and tend to pile up and end up hopefully in the recycle bin. I began my work with those back in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, when my kids were very young, and I was kind of looking for that next material to work with, and being very much stuck at home with my kids. I was noticing the ads and kind of intrigued by the materiality and also the way they spoke to consumerism and also domesticity. And my materials tend to also kind of pique some kind of nostalgia for me, and my mom was a big coupon clipper. And so I remembered that kind of act of care that she did very religiously, the way that she clipped coupons, and that was an important way for her to create value for the family. So my initial work with these materials was literally like clipping the products from the ads. That act of extraction felt very poignant to me and resonated with my experience as a young mother, feeling like my labors were unseen, and that, you know, my work was kind of, society was like extracting it from me without giving much back or without much recognition. So the work began with this very simple act, and it was like simple collaging of the materials. And then my family and I moved to the Bay Area. It was like a huge jump for me, both personally and professionally, and I found myself in this new world. And my way of grounding was just to like go back to the ads and do the clipping. But I knew the work needed to go somewhere bigger, that there was more to say there. And, you know, started coming down to LA just to explore the art scene, and I was so struck driving down the 5 by those barren fields that represent the monoculture of industrial agriculture, and it felt so senseless, like this very senseless exploitation of the land. And it just clicked for me that I needed to layer these, I think of them almost like lace work. Like I definitely come back to a relationship with textiles. So layering kind of the lattice work of the extracted grocery ads with images of the fallow farmland. And it became this huge metaphor, I think, for not only kind of the environmental crisis, the food crisis, but also the crisis, I think, of how we treat mothers in this culture. So I really wanted the analogy of the land to the female body to be prominent in the work. And that's actually blossomed a lot more in some of the later pieces that I've done that aren't represented here. But it's been an ongoing exploration.
So I
majorly showed in San Francisco before this. Have a space out there in the Dog Patch neighborhood at the Dog Patch Collective, and I recently got a space here at One Zimmer Studio. So right now I am San Francisco and LA artist. So I was born in India and moved to the US when I was 21. I work with multiple mediums: painting, fiber sculpture, photography, and installation art. Major themes of my work are identity through the lens of diaspora, the domestic realm, domestic ritual, and women's work celebrating the labor of women. So I like incorporating material and processes from the domestic realm, and I find connection through the material, telling stories through the material. So the artworks included in this exhibition are titled Winding and Unwinding. So I'd like to share the work both in the context of this exhibition and also the personal meaning they have to me. So these works are made by hand wrapping. It's actually leftover threads that comes from a sari loom. Like it goes to the loom and there's this leftover waste that comes, and usually many times it's like, I've heard lots of stories about what's done with them, but sometimes it's even burned for fuel, or more recently they've been gathered and they've somehow recycled and they're making the second saris, but I've been gathering them for a while right now. So I wrap them and I kind of rearrange them. Many times as I unwind those spools, I keep the pattern. It kind of gives me a cue as to how to proceed to how the work will get finished. But overall, it gives this whole essence of a sari. So through my hand-spun work, I hope to honor the resilience of the Indian weavers community, the significance of their crafts in the Indian history and culture. And in the context of this exhibition, 36 Parallel, I'm thinking about trade and industry. My work reflects on the devastating effects the British colonization had on the livelihood of the Indian weavers, the taxes and the tariffs imposed on the Indian textile, and the promotion of the British-made goods resulted in the decline of the Indian weaving industry. I always take pride in sharing my great-grandfather was the handloom president of India during his lifetime. His name is Somappa Machani, and he was born in 1906, and he lived through the colonial rule. He was a weaver himself, and also he lived after India's independence from the colonial rule. And he was a social activist. He worked extensively with the weavers community in India during and after the colonial rule to improve their living and working condition, helping them to obtain government benefits, promoting their work. For his philanthropic work and dedication, he also was recognized by the government of India with an award. It's called the Padma Shri. It's a very high civilian award, and we have great honor, and both my mom and dad are also in a way related in this extended family. So for me, the ties are strong. I've heard a lot of stories growing up about the whole family and heritage. And thinking about the winding and unwinding work, this work from a personal point of view, the work process of wrapping is a very meditative process, and pretty much all of my work involves some kind of meditative process. It gives me a sense of escape from everyday. I also feel a sense of collaboration the way I work with these pieces, a collaboration with the weavers community and a connection with my ancestors. And then thinking about the sari, Sari to me is really tied with memories. It is really about the body, the people who are wearing them. I'm thinking about, like, my mom, my aunts, all the people who are who mainly been part of the domestic realm. So it's about honoring them, honoring their work, the domestic labor, the women's work, and so in general, the saris, like, elaborate, the brocaded silk saris are worn during festivals and celebratory occasions, and my intention for these works to bring that kind of a similar uplift to the viewers. The viewers.
It's been incredible to watch this series grow, and I think we're looking at this accessible points in our work. What surrounds us in landscape, many times challenging situations, to then evolve into poetic and beautiful forms. So I know that Liz Miller Kovacs has some really stunning pieces up front, and if you want to take it away and dive into them. So.
Hi everyone, I'm Liz Miller Kovacs. I actually was born and raised in the LA area, but left after high school and lived quite a few places around the globe, but starting with San Francisco, Sydney, and now in Berlin, Chiang Mai, Hawaii as well. But I'm pretty settled in Berlin now, and I'm really happy to be back here in LA, in this beautiful space and this incredible show. I've been making art for a long time, and this series that I'm showing now was started actually in the pandemic, when I didn't have really a community to work with, and I just had time to sit on the internet, for hours and research spaces and places to go and things that would, I'm a bit of an adventurer, and think something that would, get me out of my everyday reality. And I came across an extraction site out in the desert, because I was still in LA, I had not yet moved to Berlin. So I was staying out in the desert in an empty Airbnb, and found a place I could drive to that was actually a chloride extraction site. And I just said, I didn't really think about what it was. I just thought, wow, there's this really cool landscape out in the desert. And I started to research more and more of these places, and some of them are quite benign, some of them are quite toxic, and I found more and more of them throughout California and then gradually around the world, and realized that there are all kinds of different extraction sites and places where the landscape has been radically altered that most people don't have any idea exist. And some of, I've been to 3 in California that I've shot at, and there are, of course, many more. Actually, no, I've been to 4 places, because one is the oil field. So that's how this series started. Obviously, the mainstay of this practice is mostly high-resolution photography. Obviously, the first costume was not working with a costume designer. It was actually just like a bondage body stocking that I happened to have sitting in my studio that I threw in the car and decided to, go out and use for the shoot. I threw in a couple other costumes as well, but this is the one that resonated with me with the space. And then I started designing costumes after that. And the costumes are inspired by this great history of women being wrapped, veiled, restrained, and protected. And the draped figure, as well as the draped figure in art, but also just almost the female being treated as a commodity, traded for livestock, or this idea of the veiled pure Virgin Mary. It goes on and on. So it's a very broad reference. There's not a specific cultural reference, and it's also a way to just obscure the identity. It is always me in the work, because number one, generally the places are a little bit precarious or dangerous or illegal to be in. And also it's just about the universality of the feminine form and its history in art and its relationship to the landscape as well. So I do see parallels between, you know, I'm not a mother, but the idea of motherhood being work that goes very not as well recognized, I guess, as it should be, under-recognized and underappreciated, and the idea of the earth, you know, and obviously we need and we benefit from many of the products from the earth, but just the sort of under-recognition of everything that it's providing. So, so that's kind of I mean, in my work echoes surrealism as well, and colors, but it's really important to me that I'm actually present in these landscapes. So I also make sculptures about these experiences. As far as how my work responds to the 36th parallel and liminal spaces, I mean, these extraction spaces, mines, surface mines, quarries, and other extraction sites, some of them are, you know, salt pans, whatever, they exist all around the globe, and I generally operate within somewhere near this 36th parallel. So I feel like the scope of this parallel around the earth, it's a nice way to bind this sort of practice and this sort of multicultural indulgence in our extracted materials together.
Well, your use of like copper as material alone is such a globally used and
it's a vast phenomenon. And so, I mean, as far as these are liminal spaces because these sites provide jobs and resources, but they also create, you know, environmental and health concerns worldwide and also locally to the communities that surround them. So that's something that, I mean, I research for literally months and sometimes years, you know, how safe it is to even enter a lot of these spaces, and often I'm there, I'm like, okay, this is okay to be at the edge of, or to be here for a couple hours, even the dust, or sometimes it's like, okay, I can actually step in this water, but you don't want to swim in it, you know, and you know, then take a shower. But knowing that there are communities that are living on the edge of these places is really interesting, and, you know, a bit, you know, jarring at times. So yeah, the mining sites are the intersection of global trade and the commodification of metal, stone, and rare earth minerals and other resources. But the copper, I mean, it's been long used for heating, construction, electronics, you know, and it's used for energy transmission in general. It's been the desire for copper has been skyrocketing because of obviously EV batteries and electric cars. One thing about copper is that it is completely recyclable. But it has become this it used to be like this very kind of cheap, almost throwaway material, and now it's become almost like a precious metal. So I was really thinking about that in these pieces in the two spaces that I visited in 2021 and 2023. They're actually in Europe, but there are spaces here as well. There's a couple places on my map that are in the US that I want to visit.
Well, I love how you brought in the 50 pounds of copper into the gallery and have used that with her video piece up front, and that the video and the beautiful print on copper, as well as the imageries, all of the images are relating to the copper industry, which as an artist, like a lot of my work and discovery of the outskirts of Arequipa, where my mother is born and raised, and then, you know, it's like going to the outskirts and really discovering what a huge role of extraction from the copper industry is happening, and where half my family is, and then realizing what the results of the role of that industry in the economy, and how that affects the landscape and how that affects the people. So in like your photograph up front, we have the lush, healthy green, but it's full the toxins.
It's a cyanide lake, basically, that's flooded a village, the Orange Lake. Just to give you guys, it's in Romania. It's a place called Jemana, a flooded village. So the Romanian government flooded this village in the 90s, so they could build this large copper mine that's up on the mountain above, and there's a stream that comes down the mountain that I found, and I found the source, and it flows into this lake that now you can just see the church steeple from the old town sticking out of this lake. And then there's also some electrical wires that you can see poking around. And the video was also shot on the edge, on a different part of the lake, closer to where it turns into white silt. So those two pieces were shot. And I also went to the copper mine one day. I climbed up there. My friend and collaborator who I traveled with. And then the other place is the print on copper is in Spain at Embalse de Gozan, and that is in Huelva, which is near the Rio. It's basically the reservoir from 30 years of Rio Tinto mining and the buildup, the mineral, all the iron-rich soil there. So I made that trip around New Year's.
And I'm curious, Ellen, too, with the piece that we have right here that's much more industrial, but can you tell us about where that is?
Yeah. That is the only oil refinery in Ireland.
Okay.
And it's a ConocoPhillips facility called Whitegate. And I was invited to come and have a look around there as an artist in 2009, actually.
Yeah.
And when I got there, I had this funny thought, like, and why did I go all the way to Ireland to go to an oil refinery when I live in the United States? And then I realized, well, in the United States, in Texas or New Jersey, they wouldn't say, come on in. I hope you've got your camera with you today, do you? Take as many pictures as you want. We're so happy you're here. Well, that wouldn't happen in the United States. It'd be like, we're calling the police, and no, you're not invited to come with your camera. So I made some large dystopic sculptures out of plastic that I pulled out of the waste stream. And those, they were based on the architecture that I was able to see at Whitegate. And I made large drawings based on my time at Whitegate. And now, all these years later, I'm pulling those photographs back out again and using them in these weavings and so forth. The plastic pieces were a kind of a daisy chain that went on for 8 years. And at the time, I made what I thought was a funny joke. I said, I'm making the garbage version of a Buddhist sand painting, because each plastic waste piece, and the largest one was 30 feet long and floated in the river in Providence, each one, when it was no longer part of an exhibition or in a public place like the one at the Providence River, I would then recycle it into the next one. So over 8 years, I was trying to minimize the footprint of the sculpture itself. Mm-hmm. So, and I also was very clear to myself, I wasn't saving the world at all. I was interrupting a circuit. I was interjecting myself into people's recycling efforts, another topic. And I was pulling the stuff out and using it and making these, gloomy pieces, and then make another one, until after 8 years, there was one at the end. And I showed that a couple of times, and then I saved the architecture and recycled the rest. So that is the Whitegate oil refinery there. And I've done a new series of works based on plants that can clean up oil spills, they can rebalance polluted water that has too much nitrogen and phosphorus in it, and that's mustard in there. Mustard's one of the hardworking, humble plants that can, work for its plant living. So I have a new show that's opening on September 8th in New York. I don't think they picked me because their name is Plant House Gallery, but that's where the show is. The show is these plants that can be used to remediate toxins in all kinds of ways. And then the other room of the show are woven portraits that include plants and glaciers and oil refineries and so forth. Yeah, September 8th.
I think we're such great, navigators, just looking at how, each of you have spoken about looking and discovering and examining what's been the results of the ancient civilizations and what has resulted and deemed as wonderful, but we're dealing with a lot of consequences of culture, economies, and all of those shifts that have happened since, and just that sort of need to put out like what is going on with these barren, depleted grounds, or the awareness of a history of an industry with a lot of abuse and effective livelihoods, because of progress and because of prosperous industry, and your own also layers of getting to constructing the box. I know that you've been recording the video piece, waiting for permission. I'm curious, Alex, can you speak a little bit to, and author Alex, so, your many layers of creation and the unique ways that you've gotten to the performance distilled work with the pink box too.
Okay. Well, first of all, also, I want to just reference something that you were saying, which is you mentioned this word interruptions. And I think, actually, if I really think about each of the individual works and artists here, I think we're each making an interruption, or we're trying to interrupt like a status quo, or some way in which we're perceiving things. So this is something that I really like between all of us, is I really feel these interruptions. And I want to definitely discuss that as well. So in terms of the monologue, it's definitely been a layered process. So what also Beth is referencing is I'm just finishing writing a novel that's taken me 10 years. And so it's in its final edits. And it was again another type of interruption, which was to try and interrupt the narration, both my own personal way that I was narrating my life, and the way in which narrations control our lives. And so it's like, how can we make these small shifts around how we're perceiving something, and how can we control the narration? And for me, one of the things, so you're referencing how I move from the physical made objects of paintings to monologue to performance. And for me, each of them, for me, always the mediums are secondary almost, because really what I'm trying to do is communicate. And I'm using whatever medium I feel will allow me to communicate the issue. And there's something about when I was doing the monologues, I'm speaking my experience, and it's using language. When I'm inside the box, I'm performing the language, what is laid upon me. I think our bodies are these receptacles that really carry our histories, and if there's, if 90% of the communication is nonverbal, what is happening? What can we read? And we're reading each other all the time. And I wanted to start understanding what was on me, how can I feel it? So the thing that's really beautiful about performance is when I'm moving my body, things become clear. So not only when I'm in that space, I'm discovering things about myself. And I think anyone who probably moves their body through a sport or anything has really experienced that, or dance, has experienced that place where the mind lets go and there's a way in which we start to feel our pain or our joy or our grief in a way that we cannot articulate verbally. And so that's how I moved from each of these things. I have this running joke that I just take these boxes around with me, and the boxes seem to have existed with me for a really long time. And the wires are also really important because I used to do these performances called Strings Attached, and I really felt like what would happen if it was a play on that word strings attached, like no strings attached. But I was like, what if I cut these strings, or what if I lean against these strings and they break? And it's that real experience between, these boxes, like sometimes you have to experience these things physically. You have to really think about, what if we cut all those strings? We fall. If the strings are too rigid, we can't move. And so there's this way in which we have to really figure out, it's even in the way that we're all making interruptions. We have to figure out how to make the interruption, but not cut our heads off during that time. So it's a very nuanced type of movement, and I think that's a lot of the time what I'm trying to explore throughout all my work is just how do I move, how do I understand where I'm at, and how do I interrupt the narration. And so that's why when you were speaking about interruption, and I feel like with the cutting out of like you're using these materials, you're interrupting. When you're taking the sari strings, you're interrupting. When you're getting your body into these locations, you're interrupting. And you're always interrupting the landscape with what you're doing. So I also would love to have you talk a little bit about your work.
No. Yeah, but I like this idea of interruption, and I think that sometimes repetitive use of an image is in the pieces here, or I'm very playful in my approach with using certain deemed traditional media and pushing the edges of what might be expected. And in the print work I have here, the etchings and the photopolymers, I think the freedom I felt in the area of the printmaking rooms at Collard Institute enabled me to really look harder at each image, but not, I don't, I like to feed the idea of repetition into the construction of a place or landscape, in the sense that we always need to look more than once or look twice. So sometimes there's multiple transfers in my other work, or the idea of a static image, or one way to perceive something is needs to be interrupted or disrupted, and I'm often working to resolve that, as many of us are, right? So yeah, landscape, which is a context, a broad context for a lot of our work, has been a go-to word for me to really look at how the different cross points intersect. I think I look at the economic landscape quite a bit when I'm traveling, and looking at how prosperity or difficult times economically are seen in the landscape, and urban landscapes, or the outside of urban sites, and reading like the disparity or prosperity of culture, and how society might function within that as a result. So when there's development or shift, there are areas of interest for me to dive into.
And you were saying these pieces are directly from your mother's homeland, is that correct?
Yeah, they're really memory-laden in the sense of the direct area of Arequipa, surrounding my aunt's house, and a lot of viewpoints that I saw a number of times growing up before I started exploring like the outside of Arequipa.
the larger state too. So there's always a sense of like, I try to rebuild kind of this accessible but inaccessible landscape and homeland for me.
Are they drawn from memory back?
No.
They're from
They're,
photographs?
yeah, I worked on the etchings based on photographs that I took there, yeah.